Hello, my name is Rafael De Conte. I'm from globebroking.com and I will talk with you about the world economy and the future of humanity. Well, when we start to compare countries, we start generally, usually by the GDP, that is the gross domestic product, right? Or in other words, the production of goods and services, of all goods and services of a country. So, let's see some data concerning GDP of the countries, because when we look to the GDP of USA, we can see $21 trillion. And when we look to the China GDP, we can see $14 million, right? So let's see here. In this site, you can go to another sites about economical data, and of course, data is not 100% exactly because governments like humans lies, right? But we can have a good notion analyzing the GDP of these countries. So, as I said, the United States with $21 trillion of GDP and China with 14, right? But if I want to compare these countries, this is not enough. This is just one element. So, if we open here the graph about GDP of USA concerning the past 10 years, we can see that always increasing. Let's take a higher period, like the maximum period. Look to this graph, right? Always increasing, always increasing. And let's see the GDP of China, because the economical development of China started a few decades ago, right? In this rhythm that we have today of growing of the Chinese GDP. So, as you can see, when we take the 2000 year, starts an incredible increase of the gross domestic product of China. But let's think. Well, if I have a population in the United States of 300 persons, let's see the exact number here. Population of United States. You can see that is this number, right? So, the GDP per capita, right, is much high, is higher than we compare with China, because the population of China, this is incredible. This is amazing. We have 1.4 billion of persons in China. I like this phrase here, this test. 1 among 5 persons in the world is resident in China. This is incredible. So let's think about another elements to compare the countries. How much costs a Big Mac in Shanghai and how much costs a Big Mac in New York? Why Big Mac? Because you have a product that is composed by the same elements, being Shanghai or in New York, right? So you can understand the price of the things. So, like a budget, you need to see what are the earnings and what are the expenses, right? So, is it cheap to live in China today? Of course, it's cheaper than live in USA, right? So you need understand all the elements to compare the countries. Let's think about the government debt, right, in relation to the GPD. We can see that, for example, China on a half of the GPD is connected with a public debt because the government. But when we go to the United States, we can see that the government debt in relation to the GDP is very high because it's more than 100%, right? So, not necessarily you have USA as the big potence in the world, right? Because it's very expensive to live in USA. Why? Our roads lead to China, the big emerging economy, because you can grow up with expenses that are not so high like in the USA. Let's think about other countries, right? Let's see Brazil. I want to see Brazil here. Well, we are one of the first economies, right? You can see that it's almost $2 trillion, our GDP for this year. And the population of Brazil, let's see, something like 200 million persons. Let's see the population. You can see 210 million persons. Let's see the curve. And let's see the GPD of Brazil. The graph about the GPD of the last 10 years, right? 25 years since 1995. You can see this period. You can see this period, right? So, in India, why India? Because one among 6 persons in the world is resident in India, right? So, India and China together has almost a half of the global population. Let's think about how a Darwinian theory can be applied to understand the economic power of the countries. Because what the theory of Darwin express? Well, if you are an aspecie, and you need to survive, you need to adapt to the environment, right? So, the species that will live and reproduce is that one that can adapt to the environment. We are talking adaptation. Let's think about the countries with less GDP, 1.4 trillion, 4 billion of persons live in China and are living their lives. When you think about the USA, you need $21 trillion for 300 persons live their lives. So, India with less are growing the population, right? And Europe, when we think about Europe, Spain, Germany, Italy, French, you can see that all these countries are not really increasing their population, right? So what is the end of the European people, considering a theory of Darwin, right? Thinking about the population of the world, considering the 1.4 billion of persons in China, you can see that when you compare these elements, right, of population and GDP, gross domestic product, you can understand that with less Chinese and Indian people are living their lives. Why? US residents need so much. So we start to do these questions, and when we start to do these questions, we start to understand, well, maybe we can think that Darwin is right, and we can apply the Darwinian theory on the countries. In this meaning, with the population, if the country is not growing up the population, the country is less adapted to the environment, right? So, it's not so simple you determine what is the real power of a country. It's not on analyze the GDP, right? Let's think about Russia, for example. Why Russia has a powerful in the role? Because the GDP of Russia is not so high. It's less than 2 trillions, right? Such as well as the population are less than 200 million of persons. So, here we have the GDP of Russia. Well, so the reason for the power of Russia is related with military power. So let's see the expenses concerning to the military sector, military expenditure in Russia. So we have this number here. Let's see now the United States military expenditure. Wow, look to this number, right? Let's come back to the Russian number. Well, 10 times of difference among these two expenditures. So, of course, concerning to military power, USA is the first country. Concerning to the economic power, the GDP is the first country, but the cost of living in the US is also high. And the military power of Russia is 10 times less concerning the expenses than the military expenditure of the USA. But when we think about Russia, we need to think also about the Soviet Union, right? In the Soviet Union, we have two key technologies that are aerospace technology and nuclear technology for weapons. So, the technology of nuclear science to the purpose of weapons, only a few countries have, and Russia is one of them, with thousands of nuclear weapons that, with association with the aerospace technology, can target, for example, Washington. So, we have Russia, that is the one of the countries resulted of the extinction of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union economy. Well, if we come back in time, we will see that the Soviet Union economy was the second in the world. Of course, the second and the first always USA. Even with a planified economy, what happens in a communist system like Soviet Union? Well, you do not have a free market. This industry will produce this kind of good to supply this other industry that will produce this kind of good, and the production of the number of goods of this industry and this other industry are determined by the state, right? Not by the free market. So the person go to a grocery, to a market, and buy the things that the state put to be sell. And even with this, you have the production in the country, because it is not possible, you understand, that you have the Soviet Union as the second GDP in the period of the existence. It's impossible. You think that the second GDP country cannot produce something. Of course that Soviet Union produced goods and services, right? But coming back, we have two base kinds of power: economical power and military power. Russia, even with a not so good economical power, have a very strong military power because nuclear weapons. Today we talk about the information technology and the cyber attacks, the cyber war. Yes, this is the focus now. But if we think the revolutionary technology was the nuclear technology, and not only to produce weapons, but also to produce energy. And this is a big problem. Why? Because when you have a nuclear industrial plant that will produce energy, you can have the risk of an accident that will produce an exclusion zone for humans. So we have the Chernobyl accident, right, in Pripyat, the city of Pripyat. You have the Fukushima accident, right, in Japan. Japan has more than 40, 50 nuclear plants to produce energy. Here in Brazil we have two at this moment, that is Angra dos Reis, two principal nuclear reactors producing energy. That here in Brazil I think that is something like 3% of the total energy produced in the country. So energy as a key element of a country, of the power of a country, right? And we have this picture of the world. United States, China, India, Brazil, and all the countries that has more than 200 million persons, right? Let's see these countries. Here, population. Let's see. China with 1.4 billion persons, India with 1.3 billion persons, and then United States, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria. These countries are the emerging economies of the future. Not Nigeria, because it's very low, nor Pakistan. But Brazil, considering the GDP and the population, Brazil rocks, man. Will be one of the next great economies in the world, such as China and India. India is not a poor country because a GDP per capita. But if you think China and India and even Brazil need less than a North American person to live the life and have a good life. So we need to start to understanding this perspective also, right? So this is globebroking.com. Please come to our website and visit our website to get more information about global business. My name is Rafael Deconte, and I'm a philosopher and a lawyer here in Brazil. Thank you for your attention.